The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England, a handbook for visitors to the 14th century. Ian Mortimer. Introduction. Welcome to medieval England. What does the word medieval conjure up in your mind? Knights and castles, monks and abbeys, huge tracts of forest in which outlaws live in defiance of the law. Such images may be popular, but they say little about what life was like for the majority. Imagine you could travel in time. What would you find if you went back to the 14th century? Imagine yourself in a dusty London street on a summer morning. A servant opens an upstairs shutter and starts beating a blanket. A dog guarding a traveler's pack horse starts barking. Nearby traders call out from their market stalls, while two women stand chatting, one shielding her eyes from the sun, the other with a basket in her arms. The wooden beams of houses project out over the street. Painted signs above the doors show what is on sale in the shops beneath. Suddenly, a thief grabs a merchant's purse near the trader's stalls, and the merchant runs after him, shouting. Everyone turns to watch, and you, in the middle of all this, where are you going to stay tonight? What are you wearing? What are you going to eat? As soon as you start to think of the past happening as opposed to it having happened, a new way of conceiving history becomes possible. The very idea of traveling to the Middle Ages allows us to consider the past in greater breadths, to discover more about the problems which the English have had to face, the delight they found in life, and what they themselves were like. As with a historical biography, a travel book about a past age allows us to see its inhabitants in a sympathetic way, not as a series of graphs showing fluctuations in grain yields or household income, but as an investigation into the sensation of being alive in a different time. You can start to gain an inkling as to why people did this or that, and even why they believe things which we find simply incredible. You can gain this insight because you know that these people are human, like you, and that some of these reactions are simply neutral. The idea of traveling to the Middle Ages allows you to understand these people not only in terms of evidence, but also in terms of their humanity, their hopes and fears, the drama of their lives. Although writers have traditionally been forced to resort to historical fiction to do this, there is no reason why non-fiction writers should not present his material in just as direct and as sympathetic a manner. It does not make the facts themselves less true to put them in the present tense rather than the past. In some sense, the idea is now new. For many decades, architectural historians is not new. For many decades, architectural historians have been recreating images of castles and monasteries as they appeared in their heyday. Museum curators similarly have reconstructed old houses and their interiors, filling them with the furniture of a past age. Groups of individuals have formed reenactment societies, attempting to discover what it was like to live in a different time through the bold, practical experiment of donning period clothing and cooking with a cauldron on an open fire, on trying to wield a replica sword while wearing heavy armor. Collectively, They remind us that history is much more than an educational process. Understanding the past is a matter of experience as well as knowledge, striving to make spiritual, emotional, poetic, dramatical, and inspirational connection with our forebears. It is about our personal reaction to the challenges of living in previous centuries and early cultures, and our understanding of what makes one century different from another. The nearest historians have come to considering the past as first-hand is the genre of what-if or virtual history. This is where historians consider what would have happened if things had turned out differently. For example, what if Hitler had invaded Britain in 1940? What if Spanish Armada had been successful while such speculations are open to obvious criticism that these things did not happen, with the implication that there is no point considering them, they have the great virtue of taking the reader directly to a moment in time and presenting events as if they were still unfolding. This can bring a real immediacy to a narrative. Put yourself in the shoes of the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo or Nelson at Trafalgar. Nielsen. They were only too well aware of the consequences of defeat, so too were they political masters back in England. They certainly considered the past that never was, so to reconstruct what might otherwise have happened brings us closer to those leaders in their moments of their decision-making. Just think, if Henry IV had not returned to England in 1399 to remove Richard II from power, we would have several more years, perhaps many more, of Richard's tyrannical rule, probably resulting in the destruction of the Lancastrian dynasty and all those who supported it. In the spring of 1399, that likelihood was the key political issue and one of the reasons why Henry did return. It was also the principal reason why so many men supported him. In this way, it is clear that seeing events as happening is crucial to a proper understanding of the past, even if the results are just as speculative now as they were at the time. Virtual history, as described above, is only useful for understanding political events. It has relatively little value for social history. We cannot probably speculate on what might have happened if, say, the Black Death had not come to Europe. It was not a matter of decision-making. But as with reconstruction of a typical medieval house, virtual time traveling allows us a clear, more integrated picture of what it was like to live in a different age. In particular, it raises many questions which previously may not have even occurred to us and which do not necessarily have easy answers. How do people greet each other in the Middle Ages? What is their sense of humor like? How far away from home do individuals travel? Writing history from the point of view of our own curiosity forces us to consider a number of questions that traditional history books tend to ignore. Medieval England is potentially a vast destination for those historical travelers. The 4 centuries between the Norman invasion and the advent of printing see huge changes in society. The Middle Ages are exactly that, a series of ages, and the Norman knight would find himself as out of place preparing for a late 14th century battle as an 18th century prime minister would if he found himself electioneering today. For this reason, this guidebook concentrates on just one century, the 14th. This period comes closest to the popular conception of what is medieval, with its chivalry, joust, etiquette, art, and architecture. It might even be considered the epitome of the Middle Ages, containing civil wars, battles against the neighboring kingdoms of Scotland and France, sieges, outlaws, monasticism, cathedral building, the preaching of friars, the flagellants, famine, the last of the crusades, the peasants' revolt, and above all else, the Black Death. Having emphasized that the focus of this book is 14th century England, a few caveats must be added. It is not possible to recover every detail of the period on the basis of 14th century English evidence alone. Sometimes the contemporary record is frustratingly incomplete. Also, we cannot always be sure that the manner of doing something in 1320 necessarily held true in 1390. In some cases, we can be sure that things changed dramatically. The entire nature of English warfare altered over this period. And so did the landscape of disease with the catastrophic advent of the plague in 1348. Thus were necessary details from the 15th century have been used to inform descriptions of the later part of the 14th century, and the 13th century has been used to inform judgments about the early part. This blurring of time boundaries is only necessary where very difficult questions are raised. For example, we have relatively few sources underpinning our understanding of courtesy and manners in the 14th century, whereas we have several excellent sources for the early 15th. Since it is unlikely that good manners developed overnight, the later evidence has been used as the fullest and most accurate available. Many types of source materials have been used in writing this book. Needless to say, contemporary primary sources are of vital importance. These include unpublished and published chronicles, letters, household accounts, poems, and advisory texts. Illuminated manuscripts allow daily lives in ways which the texts do not always describe. For example, whether women rode side saddle. A wealth of architectural evidence is available in the extant buildings of 14th century England, the houses as well as the castles, churches and monasteries, and the ever-expanding literature about them provides even more information. In some cases, we have documents which complement the architectural record. Building accounts and surveys, for example. We have an increasing array of archaeological finds, from excavated tools, shoes, and clothes to the pips of berries found in medieval latrines, and fish bones on the waterlogged sides of ancient ponds. We have a plethora of moral usual archaeological artifacts too, such as coins, ceramics, and ironware. The extent to which a good museum can give you an insight into how life was lived in in the Middle Ages is restricted only by your own curiosity and imagination. But most of all, it needs to be said that the very best evidence for what it was like to be alive in the 14th century is an awareness of what it is like to be alive in any age, and that includes today. Our sole context of understanding all the historical data we might ever gather is our own life experience. We might eat differently, be taller and live longer, and we might look at jousting as being unspeakably dangerous and not at all a sport. But we know what grief is and what love, fear, pain, ambition, enmity, and hunger are. We should always remember that what we have in common with the past is just as important, real, and essential to our lives as those things which make us different. Consider a group of historians in several hundred years' time trying to explain to their contemporaries what it was like to live in the early 21st century. Maybe they will have some books to rely on, some photographs, perhaps some digitized films, digitized film, the remains of our houses, and the old council rubbish pit. But overall, they will concentrate on what it is to be human. W.H. Auden once suggested that to understand your own country, you need to have lived in at least two others. One can say something similar for periods of time. To understand your own century, you need to come to terms with at least two others. The key of learning some things about the past might be a ruin or an archive, but the means whereby we may understand it is and always will be ourselves. One, the landscape, cities and towns. Is it the cathedral that you will see first? As you journey along the road, you come to a break in the trees, and there it is, a massive and magnificent, cresting the hilltop in the morning sun, despite the wooden scaffolding as its west and the long 80-foot high pointed lead roof and the flying batteries and colossal tower is simply the wonder of the region. It is hundreds of times bigger than every other building around it and dwarfs the stone walls surrounding the city. The hundreds of houses appear tiny, all at chaotic angles and of different shades of hues, as if they were so many stones at the bottom of a stream flowing around the great boulder of the cathedral. The 30 churches, though their low, stumpy towers stand out from the mass of roofs, seem humble by comparison. When you draw closer to the city walls, you will see the great gatehouse. Two round towers, each more than 50 feet high, stand either side of a pointed arch, newly built with a painted statue of the king in a niche above the grand entrance. It leaves you in no doubt about the civic pride of the city, nor its authority. Beyond these gates, you are subject to the mayor's jurisdiction. Here resides the king's officers. In the castle on the northern perimeter, here is a palace of rule and order, the high circling walls, the statue of the king, the great round towers, and above it all, the immense cathedral collectively impress you with their sheer strength. And then you notice the smell. 400 yards from the city gate, the muddy road you are following crosses a brook. As you look along the banks, you see piles of refuse, broken crockery, animal bones, entrails, human feces, and rotting meat strewn in and around the bushes. In some places, the muddy banks slide into thick quagmires, where townsmen have hauled out their refuse and pitched it into the stream. In others, rich green grasses reed the undergrowth, spring from the highly fertilized earth. As you watch two semi-naked men lift another barrel of excrement from the back of a cart and empty it into the water, a small brown pig roots around in the garbage. It is not called a shit brook for nothing. You have come face to face with the constraint of a medieval city. It is so proud, so grand, and in places so beautiful, and yet it displays all the disgusting features of a bloated glutton. The city as a body is a caricature of the human body, smelly, dirty, commanding, rich, and indulgent. As you hurry across the wooden bridge over Shitbrook and hasten towards the gates, the contrasts become even more vivid. A group of boys with dirty faces and towels hair run towards you and crowd around, shouting, "Sir, do you want a room, a bed for the night? Where are you from?" Struggling between them to take the reins of your horse and maybe pretending that they know your brother or are from the same region as you. Their clothes are filthy and their feet are filthered, bound into leather shoes which have suffered the stones and mud of the streets for more years than their own owners. Welcome to a place of pride, wealth, authority, crime, justice, high art, strength, and beggary. The city described above is Exeter, in the southwest of England, but it could almost be any of the 17 cathedral cities. You could say the same for many of the large towns too, except for the fact that their churches are not cathedrals. Arriving in every one of these places involves an assault on all the senses. Your eyes will open wide at the great churches, and you will be dazzled by the wealth and the stained glass they contain. Your nostrils will be invaded by the stench from the sewage polluted water courses and town ditches. After the natural quiet of the country road, the bird song and the wind in the trees, your hearing must attune to the calls of travelers and town criers, the showers of laborers, and the ringing of church bells. In any town on a market day or during a fair, you'll find yourself being jostled by the crowd who come in from the country for the occasion and who live it up revelry in the taverns. To visit an English town in the late 14th century is a bewildering and extreme sensory experience. A major town is an intimidating place. Already you will have seen the desiccated remains of thieves left hanging on gallows at windswept crossroad. At the principal gates of a regional capital, you will find the heads and limbs of traitors on display. When you enter the city of York, the largest city in the north, you will see the blackened heads of criminals stuck on poles above the city gates. Their eyes plucked out by birds, legs and arms hang by ropes, each the relic of a treasonable plot, now riddled with maggots or covered with flies. These remains remind you of the power of the king, a greater and more ominous shadow behind the immediate authority of the mayor and aldermen, local lords, sheriffs, and judicial courts. This, you could say, is the landscape of medieval England, a place of fear and decay. But the moment you walk under the shadow of a city gatehouse, you realize it is much more than that. In Exeter, for example, as soon as you enter the great gate of the city, you face the wide and handsome prospect of South Street. Some of the finest houses and inns are here. The gable ends of their steeply angled roofs neatly meeting the street. On your right is the Church of Holy Trinity, a cult of special devotion in the late 14th century. Farther down, you have the handsome town house of an abbot. On your left is a row of merchants' houses, some with their shops open, with silk and other expensive fabrics on their inside the convert shop fronts. For a moment you might notice the uneven surface of the road, which is dust or mud after it has rained. But when you will be distracted by the amount of activity around you, ponies and pack horses are ambling through the town towards the marketplace, laden with grain and guided by peasants from the local farms. Priests pass by, robed in their habits, with crucifixes and rosaries hanging from their girdles. Perhaps a black-robed Dominican friar is preaching to the people. At the top of the street, watched by a small circle of admirers, workers are driving their sheep and cattle into market or street carts laden with eggs, milk, and cheeses towards the line of shops known as Milk Street. The city is so alive, so full of busy people, that within a short while you will have forgotten about the decapitated traitors and Shootbrook's stench is no longer in the air. Now there is a remarkable absence of animal dung in the street. All is revealed in South Street when you see a servant showering up horse dung from the area in front of his master's house. As you walk Toward the center of the city, you will encounter more traders' shops, tightly packed together in small street front premises, sometimes tiny rooms or less than 40 square feet, but all with their distinctive projective signs to tell the illustrate their trade.